This podcast is sponsored by DevelopmentAid.org, your gateway to international tenders, grants, and the largest job database in the aid sector. Secure free registration and access funding opportunities, calls for partners, exclusive insights, and weekly news digest. Become a member today to achieve your sustainable development goals.
Hello everyone and welcome to DevelopmentAid Dialogues. I'm your host, Hisham Alam. This is a special episode of our podcast. As the world is going through a fierce period of shrinking public and civic space, fueled by ongoing conflicts, wars, shrinking foreign and humanitarian aid, and militaristic trends, it's highly important to remind ourselves about the need to resist and reclaim our human rights and freedoms. My guest today is Lotfullah Najafizada from Afghanistan, the founder of Amo TV, a Washington-based international news channel that reaches audience inside and outside Afghanistan. Lotfullah is joining us today with nearly 20 years on the front lines of Afghanistan media, including more than a decade as director of Tolo News and multiple press freedom awards. I invite you to listen to our dialogue and follow his participation in one of this year's significant events in the field of civic space, the Ottawa Civic Space Summit. The Ottawa Civic Space Summit is a new global platform to resist repression, reclaim civic power, and re-imaging a more inclusive democratic future. The event is being convened by Cooperation Canada and Resilient Societies and supported by partners like DevelopmentAid. The summit will take place in Ottawa, Canada from April 21st to 23rd, 2026. This bold gathering will bring together civil society leaders, civic space activists, governments, donors, media academics, and private sector allies to ignite hope and drive change. The registration will close on April 10th. Follow the link in the outline and transcript to secure a spot. Lotfullah, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you, Hisham. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Let me ask you first, when we say reclaim the public square, what is actually at the stake right now for journalists, civic society, and citizens who depend on open debate?
I think what's at the stake is the public square itself. And public square, as the phrase suggests, is where public should have to say. And that is unfortunately eroding. Look at the recession democratic nations, I would say.
Yes.
In the past 20 years, the number of countries, autocracies is on the rise. I think now we have 91 or 92 autocracies, and less than that, 85 or 87 democracies based on Democracy Without Borders report. And that indicates a severe recession of democracy. And that is where the public square, I think, is taking a hard hit. For that, we need to bring people back to the center of discussion and healthy discussion. I think that's what is at stake right now.
Yes, I totally agree. And that sets the frame. Now, speaking about the pressures, media freedom faces pressure from state actors, economic fragility, and platform algorithms. Which of these do you see eroding public trust fastest in 2026?
This is an interesting discussion, but for me, particularly someone coming from Afghanistan at the moment, where the Taliban turned Afghan free media, which was the freest in the entire region, to one of the most sort of closed spaces, I would say state actors is something that I'm deeply concerned, especially now that you have more autocratic states around the world. But it doesn't mean that we can really underestate the threats of economic fragility, as well as particularly social media and the way they are contributing to the erosion of trust in media. I think it's a combination of all. But look, we are dealing with state actors who, as a matter of policy, is trying to introduce a more systematic censorship. And censorship is killing trust. And people would distance themselves from media and from free media. Unfortunately, we see more and more of that, which is definitely exacerbated and supported by what you said, platform algorithms, as well as the very dire economic situation for free press around the world. I mean, Washington Post, I think just a month or so ago, shut down their entire international desk. They fired journalists who were covering Iran in the middle of the Middle East crisis.
But it's not only Taliban that is doing this. There are some democratic states, democratic regimes practicing kind of pressure on journalism.
I agree. I think there is a level of pressure that is expected from all governments, including in democratic states. And I think overall we have, the issue is the erosion of democracy here, rather than institutions not really supporting free media. But you see it also in the West. Look at the Press Freedom Index by RSF. The map is becoming more red and more orange.
Yes,
and you see very few green now.
Yes. So speaking of state actors, let's get specific. Take Trump's public attack on CNN and New York Times since his 2025 inauguration. They grab headlines but have not shifted those outlets' editorial line 1 inch. Does this prove media resilience or just expose how political noise drowns out real threats?
I think the US media is polarized, unfortunately. And you can easily live in one world and be very distant from the other. But at the same time, it's very sophisticated and very experienced.
Yes.
Especially the amount of challenges that you mentioned that they're dealing with, coming from the current administration as well as the other actors. I think, yes, there has been a great degree of resilience demonstrated by US media, but you also see the level of polarizing content in the United States, which, in my view, is not very healthy for any democracy.
They're great. Beyond noise, the operational squeeze is brutal. Journalists today are not just reporting civic decline, they are often its first target through funding cuts, surveillance, and legal pressure. Are they now on the last real defense of open civic space?
Yeah, journalists are now dealing with challenges, in our case, for our own safety. We've had journalists arrested by the Taliban in Afghanistan, for instance, scores of them, hundreds of them in the past few years. But also there is an increasing level of legal issues in so many countries, South Asia or even in Europe. We are really working very hard, journalists all around the world, for our own survival. And for that, I think we need to think about creative solutions, such as working together, building alliances, and focusing more on reporting around democracy. I've been saying in the past few years, especially since the return of the Taliban back to power in Afghanistan, that no country, including in the modern world, in the developed world, should take democracy for granted. This is something that you have to keep working on, and I think media is definitely playing a big role. But as you said, in a situation where journalists are the first targets, with loss in funding, with more surveillance issues, with legal issues, then who's gonna protect journalists? I think also we have to invest in mechanisms and in institutions that their job is to look after journalists, and journalists can look after stories and go produce good content. There has to be a clear division of labor, which all contribute to a healthy and free media reporting.
Yes, as you have said, governments talk principles but act differently. We see governments pledge free expression while passing digital surveillance laws and starving public interest media. What is the single biggest disconnect you see in their approach?
I think there's a lack of follow-up.
Who should follow up?
Constituents, people, but also institutions and governments. Governments make good promises every now and then. For instance, in Canada, in the G7 summit last year, Canada, for the first time, together with other G7 leaders, mentioned the threat of transnational repression, TNR. And that was a very good news for so many journalists who have left their country, that work from overseas, and see the threat of surveillance, the threat of intimidation. And I haven't really seen any major steps since then that what has actually happened. They talked about establishing mechanisms to follow up on TNR in Canada as well as elsewhere in the G7. I think sometimes these pledges, as you said, are not really followed up. How can we force the government to do it? I think partially journalists should also keep reporting on some of these. And constituent pressure is also very important, that they know that this is going to affect them in their next time they go to ballot.
But how to keep reporting? We are facing, you and me and other journalists, budget cuts, kind of self-censorship and administrative censorship, and a lot of laws that are tying our hands.
It's like developing a news bulletin. You can't just focus on one story. And that's what I see too much in our world today. Everyone is focusing on the big story, and you lose focus on so many important but smaller stories. I think the people should be given sort of the big picture where you see coverage of non-political or non-sort of major headline stories. And yes, when we see censorship, when we see some other challenges, I think it's the responsibility of the newsrooms to be more creative, to find loopholes, because these things are not new. Yes, we are probably at a peak right now, but we've been dealing with some of these challenges forever. I've been reporting on Afghanistan for the past 20 years, in Afghanistan and on Afghanistan. And Afghanistan was the deadliest country for journalists for 20 years. We lost over 100 colleagues and reporters to direct Daesh and Taliban attacks. But it did not really cause press freedom to decline. Their sacrifices made us more resilient, made us more creative, made us more committed to the cause.
Who's making the change and the brave reporting? Reporters in exile or those who are on the ground?
I think both. I'm mostly referring to the Afghanistan before 2021. After 2021, with the return of the Taliban, things have changed. Things have changed in a way that there are journalists who are committed to free reporting, free media, but then there are Taliban who do not want anything that criticizes them. Especially if you're a female journalist, they're not even allowing you as a female journalist to talk to a man. You have to cover your face when you appear on screen. If you're doing a talk show, you have to check with them the topic in advance, select guests from the pool of vetted or the list that they have provided to you. But journalists in exile, journalists overseas, is trying to bypass that firewall by talking to people directly. We have this call-in show, which has been covered by the Globe and Mail recently and Global News TV and the BBC, that up to 6,000 people called this call-in show in just 1 hour from inside Afghanistan on WhatsApp. So when you're dealing with that kind of people, who want to be expressive, want to be engaged, and then you have a government, a ruler, not allowing local media to provide that platform, then that's where hybrid media or exile media or diaspora media comes into play. And I think that's what we do at Almo TV at the moment, is trying to bypass the Taliban firewall, enable people in Afghanistan to talk freely and in thousands, which it makes it impossible for the Taliban to go and create that kind of blanket censorship.
Speaking about hybrid media and tech, which is adding another layer on how to fight back, with AI flooding news feeds and platforms like X dictating reach, how should media adapt without trading editorial independence for survival? Or can you give us one non-obvious tactic?
I think we should not rely too much on social media for distribution of quality content. Social media is a platform for distribution of content, but it is not a place where you can go find. It's not a newsroom, right? It's not where you have different layers of editorial control or oversight. And I think Canada is probably a good example here, because Canada has this law that is encouraging people to go use the original source of the news. So if they want to sort of see the Globe and Mail reporting or Toronto Star or CBC and others, they encourage us to go to their website to read them, or the TV channel or the newspaper, rather than finding them on X or on Facebook. I think that is a good way of sort of keeping the focus narrow and pure to the pure content which is out there. Of course, I'm not in favor of censorship in social media as well, but social media is not journalism. I think that is what a lot of people are confused in today's world. They see all sorts of content and opinionated narratives, and it's really hard to distinguish between, what's right and what's fed to them, as you said. Algorithm is creating this balloon around you that is making your opinions shift in a way that you think you're right and everybody else is wrong. And that is, in a way, also a threat to democracy, to understanding, to your ability to be able to agree with people you don't agree with.
Or to control the public opinion with fake accounts and spreading fake narratives. But
yes.
Exactly. I agree with you somehow on this, but what do you think of authentic accounts that are using open source information and produce a good quality piece of journalism?
Yes. I think we need digital literacy. Not everybody's spreading fake news or misinformation. We are actually talking about algorithm as well as actors with ill intention who want to use this opportunity to push the narrative that is far from true. And for that, I think every society, particularly the global south, we need very proactive digital literacy campaign. And sometimes it's very hard, even for our readers in Afghanistan and elsewhere, to distinguish between, a credible platform versus somebody with massive social media followings, pumping polarized content, polarized hatred, and racism and discrimination. And I think the only way to address this is to empower the readers, the consumers, that they know that what they're dealing with, that they are not confused by the content that they see.
Lotfullah, if we want journalism to survive in 2026, rank these points by impact. Legal chills, independent funding pools, tech safety tools, or public mandate for platforms accountability.
Oh, this is a tough one, but I think they're all important. I think independent funding is absolutely critical because if you don't survive, then how can you do your job? So that's why
exactly
you must have that independent support. I think legal shield is also equally important because then you don't outlaw journalists who provide critical reporting, and you see more and more of this in today's world. I think the third one, I would say probably tech safety tools is something that is protecting journalists and is needed. Here in Canada, Citizen Lab is doing an amazing job. I interviewed the director of Citizen Lab for a think tank event recently, and I was so pleased to live in a society where organizations like the Citizen Lab try to protect journalists. So these kind of education, particularly around digital security and cybersecurity, is absolutely critical. And accountability as well, I think is equal. I mean, they're all important. I would say you need to have independent funding and legal support to have the resources and the freedom to operate. And the rest adds on and empowers you further to reclaim the public square and help journalism survive in 2026 and beyond. The world today for media is very scary. And that's why I think we need all of them and more.
That gets us to civic space itself. Would you describe a healthy civic space in practice, not ideals, but what daily public life looks like when debate thrives and dissent is not punished?
It looks ordinary. Reporters asking hard questions without fear, right? And activists meeting without surveillance, and citizens criticizing leaders without really losing their jobs. And disagreements can happen without punishment. This is probably, I don't know. I mean, in some societies, may sound too much and some not really. And to me, these are what we've experienced in the past with variations of good and bad. But overall, this is how a healthy civic space would probably look to me. And this is part of it, or all of it, is one way or the other under attack, probably everywhere around the world today.
Events like Canada's Civic Summit promise human rights progress. Do they genuinely expand the social and civic space, or just generate feel-good declarations with no teeth?
I'm very excited about it. I think it's the first time happening. I'm very excited to be there and to speak about this particular topic. And I think it can definitely be empowered if we come out of it. Yes, it's good to feel good about it, but at the same time, come out of the summit with some concrete action points and with a plan of action that we can follow through. A lot of these events, yes, good conversations happen, but are rarely followed up. I would say that there are three things that, we come out of this and then we say, we're going to do this until the next summit. This is absolutely critical, particularly for the organizers, to see how they can bridge the summit next year, which I believe is going to happen as well, between what we're going to discuss later this month.
What should realistic attendees expect from that summit? Binding policy wins, stronger activist network, or just another round of photo ops and panel talks?
I think recognizing the challenges and agreeing on the challenges, particularly if they are common and collective, and understanding each other, that, okay, if something is happening in Canada, might sound different in the outset to what's happening in Nigeria, for instance, but the core of it is similar, is one thing. So maybe a sharper common language is important. And in the same time, I think alliance building and networking is absolutely critical, especially when hundreds of people come from different parts of the world. I think, sympathy and empathy is something that I want to see out of these conferences. So people come not only for what they're looking for, but also learning from others and trying to find the strength out of other people's contributions and basically believe in working together. So this civic space is a space for everyone, a space for all civic actors. And you can't really, in my view, especially in the age of algorithm and digital, you can't really limit it to a particular geography. So you must have certain understanding, certain level of cooperation, which is cross-border.
Lotfullah, economic moves often hide the real clampdown. Consider Rwanda's 2025 media tax hikes or India's digital registry mandate. They hit independent outlets hardest. How do these economic moves equality shrink civic space more than overt bans?
Because sometimes, you bury these censorships and restrictions under administrative barriers. And that's why we have to look beyond what is introduced as a sort of a tax reform that you mentioned in those two countries in particular, or the press registration system in India that you mentioned. I think making life more difficult for content producers and for journalists and for media outlets is another way of limiting their abilities to do it. Maybe it's interesting for your audience, if I give another reference to Afghanistan, that even as a YouTube content producer, if you're a YouTuber in Afghanistan, you have to have a license now. And that license, you have to pay for it. And let alone the content that you produce has to be aligned with what the Taliban authorities want you to do it. So we're dealing with a lot of sort of creative, sophisticated censorship mechanisms throughout the world, whether that is the other name of taxation or streamlining policies. I think this is where a lot of institutions such as CPJ and others have to come in and ensure that governments who may not use the word censorship is not applying censorship through introduction of such mechanisms and policies.
Thank you for this. Back to the summit's core mission. To truly reclaim the public square at this summit, what is priority one? Rebuilding public trust, enforcing institutional accountability, or protecting the raw right to disagree without digital exile?
That's a very important question. I think that is the theme of the summit as well. The raw right to disagree has to be protected and respected. So if you have an alternative opinion, it doesn't mean that you have to pay the price for it. And that is where you can build trust. Common trust, where there's one space, not different spaces that are in contradiction with each other, at war with each other. In the data space, I don't think you can really build the accountability at all. I think more sort of common understanding of shared challenges can happen only when you protect the raw right to disagree, in my view.
Thank you, Lotfullah, for this nice conversation. That is the unfiltered take on reclaiming the public square. Less about slogans, more about survival, accountability, and who actually hold the microphone in 2026. Lotfullah, thank you again for bringing frontline clarity from Afghanistan and for the work you and your team at AMO TV keep doing under extraordinary pressure. To our listeners, if this conversation resonated, share it, subscribe, and follow whenever you get DevelopmentAid Dialogue podcast. I'm your host, Hisham Alam, saying it all. Thank you for listening, and goodbye.